I wanted to share another lesson I learned in 2024, which is the idea of trust versus trust. So this obviously applies to you and other people, like the trust between you and other people, but it also applies to the trust you have within yourself. And obviously, like just trust, that's just kind of like your regular level of like belief. Like you may trust your work colleague or your friend, but would you actually trust them with your life? Like if your life depended on it, would you trust your friend? And so there's layers in trust. And obviously, this is just a way of simplifying that. There's not necessarily just trust and trust from 0 to 100. There's many like levels. And I realized for me that I operated most of my life just with friends that I trusted, but I didn't have anyone that I like trusted. And that was probably why like I always felt like kind of just a lost, like isolated in life and not having like a very strong like social network. Because even though I had friends, I was surrounded by people, but I still felt alone. And I guess that's just because like I trusted people, but I didn't trust people. Like they weren't like that close. It's kind of like, at school you kind of just hang out with the group of friends that you're very familiar with, but you may not necessarily actually be friends with them. You're kind of just friends with them because you all go to the same school, or you all do the same subject, or you're all in the same class. And so how do you develop this like trust? I mean, that's still a question that I'm trying to answer. And yeah, if you have any insights on this, I'm definitely keen to listen to them. You can leave them in the comments below or just reach out. But that's definitely like one of the goals next year, just to develop more trust with my friends, and just to establish that next layer of just of trust, and just kind of build that relationship. And obviously, that's just going to be a much more like just positive experience overall, because I'll know then I'll have people I can rely on. But at this stage, one of the things I want to focus on first is actually developing trust within myself. So one of the things I realized this year is how much I don't know. And after you see like rock bottom, this is in reality the little I know compared to everything else, then you're able to almost trust yourself more, because you're not hiding anything from yourself. Everything is almost facts, in the sense that, cool, you don't know anything. That's just a reality. You accepted that. Cool. Now let's build up, because once you hit rock bottom, the only direction is going up. So from that stance, I feel like it's much easier to trust, because you know your like weakest points. And obviously, once we trust ourselves with that process, like we're able to improve. So it's not necessarily that, I trust that I am the best person in the world. It's more like I trust myself to work my way gradually up there. And regardless of whether I end up, I don't think is a very important metric. It's more like, cool, I'm going to like work on as many like important things as I can. I'm going to get as much advice as I can. I'm going to be proven wrong as many times as I can. And through that, there's going to be that growth. And that ultimately builds that trust within myself, which I think is very important. Like, it's like trust with like other people is obviously like vital. But if you don't even trust yourself, it's not going to allow you to trust other people, or for other people to trust yourself. And it's kind of like another like concept that I've been thinking about recently, which is lying. So most people think that lying to other people is bad, but I would argue the worst lie is actually the lies you tell yourself. So when you say like something like, hey, I'm going to go to the gym tomorrow, but then you don't end up going, like technically you just lied to yourself. And if it's that easy to lie to yourself, which I'm definitely like guilty of, like the gym example, then I realize my words don't actually mean that much. Like if I say, hey, I'm going to take this gap year seriously, but I know like before, like with the gym example, I don't take my words seriously. How can I actually trust that my words are like solid and they actually mean something? How do I actually trust my words? And so that's something I've been very careful with, like saying things. Because if I say something like I'm going to the gym and I don't, that not only, like most people don't see that. In fact, like obviously no one hears that because I say that to myself in my head. But for me, that kind of shatters my like trust within myself. And so for the like past few years, and especially like this year, I've been very careful with what I say. And like, obviously, I'm careful with the promises I make to other people, but more importantly, I'm careful about the promises I make to myself. I think that's very important. And the reason that's important is because if you don't trust your own words, like, how are you ever going to like set goals? How are you ever going to like achieve anything in life if the one thing that's meant to be on your side, which is yourself, isn't actually?